Hey everybody, welcome to G4G on YouTube. Today we're doing a video entitled Marvel Avengers Alliance Meta, Where Are They Now? So as you can see, this is Marvel Avengers Alliance Redux that I'll be doing this video in. There it is, Marvel Avengers Alliance Redux. It's basically Beta 2. If you need to go ahead and download a working version of Alpha 5 that has been patched up to version 1 and patched up to version 2, you can take a look at the video on my channel that says new download link. It's a few videos back, and I'll try to remember to get up a link to that download again in this video since we are on topic. So a video that I've sort of touched on in a way before when I would deal with Marvel Future Fight characters or Marvel Strike Force characters that are new, I'd often do a video tying them back to their original MAA counterparts and talk about, you know, their differences, or maybe when a character is rumored to show up in MSF, I go back to MAA and discuss what might be some of their abilities. Well, every one of those videos, I had always approached it from the angle of the new game going back to its roots. What I want to do for this video is talk about characters from the Marvel Avengers Alliance perspective, specifically characters that were quote-unquote meta and how they compare to their modern counterparts in Marvel Future Fight and Strike Force, as that's really the only games that we can talk about a meta. You may hear me reference Marvel Battle Lines once or twice on a few things, and Contest of Champions isn't worth mentioning, and Marvel Heroes, unless there was a meta amongst raids, which I never got to raid, so I don't know, it's not worth really mentioning Marvel Heroes as a comparison. So, let's jump into it. Right here on the first page, you can see a big chunk of the MCU Avengers. You see Black Widow, Hawkeye, Iron Man, and Captain America right off the start. Let's talk about them quickly as a conglomerate, because I do want to state that I've largely felt Avengers have never really been particularly impressive in the games that they show up in. You know, here in Marvel Avengers Alliance, when they first started, they were kind of meta because you didn't really have any other things. Captain America was probably the original best tank for a while, especially when you got some of the later uniforms where I believe he was able to tank right off the bat, or maybe it was an ISO, I don't remember it, but I think I remember him starting with shield guard up. But for the largest part, you know, the characters that came out of the Avengers movies were just kind of generally basic in, you know, most of the games that they were part of. They've never been that much to write home about. However, special nod to Captain America in that in Marvel Future Fight, he was the first T3, so he was a male combat hero T3 very early on, and he had a power spike with that. And in Marvel Strike Force, he is considered one of the better tanks, and he has an artificial rarity attached to him, used to, when he was harder to farm. He's easier to farm now, but he's still very good as a tank. Black Widow was never particularly meta in Marvel Avengers Alliance, had a little bit of a run as a decent speed character in Marvel Future Fight, but has actually got a very inflated rarity value in Marvel Strike Force because you can't get her easily. Those who did the beta could, because she was farmable back then, and she is extremely handy for teams. But she, other than the fact that her flying kick had the highest crit value in the game, or crit modifier, none of these four over here were that much to write home about. Hulk wasn't that much to write home about either, with the exception of his World War Hulk uniform, essentially granting you the equivalent of the Warbringer axe. The problem is, what would you rather build your team around? One piece of agent gear out of 4, later 5, or an actual full character slot? I would rather go with the agent. Granted, just about anybody could get World War Hulk as compared to the Warbringer Axe, because it's time limited, but it's a heavy-handed way of replacing a piece of agent gear, and it still never made him super meta. Minor shout-outs to the Avengers uniforms and Grey Hulk, still never particularly meta, just fringe. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about our first real one, Cyclops. So Cyclops was definitely enjoying some periods of being meta in Marvel Avengers Alliance PvP. When 90s Cyclops or Uncanny Cyclops came out, his resurrection abilities, or his don't die on me abilities, were just kind of off the charts. And before then, his Phoenix 5 outfit was pretty good. If we take a look at him over here on the Marvel Avengers Alliance wiki, and we look at the Phoenix 5, you'll see that exploit weakness does disadvantage. That's really, really strong in PvP. It turns off your class ability. Also, he would give everybody a counter, and it used to be that the counter went multiple rounds, and you know that incapacitation is pretty solid. So there was definitely a period of time where Cyclops was meta in two different uniforms. Comparing that to Marvel Future Fight, where he is fringe meta. He's considered a good leader when you're dealing with mutants, and also he has an outfit that turns him into a villain, so he helps Magneto for villain blast days. And he is now finally in Marvel Strike Force, and can certainly go a long way to completing mutant teams, and the mutant teams are meta. So here on this page, our first real standout is Iron Fist. So Iron Fist, as we know, especially when we get over to Hafe or Heroic Age Iron Fist, Hafe was super meta. He was everywhere. He was the toolkit that you needed whenever you wanted some protection. It allowed your agent and another character to go super offensive and super viable in whatever it is they were doing, because you basically left everything else up to Hafe. His combo breaker was off the charts for a while, and his ability to essentially be a hospital, an ambulance, and a fighter all in one was pretty good until he got nerfed, and then nobody was using him anymore. Well, in Marvel Future Fight, he enjoyed a little bit of a period of time of being combat hero meta, but not super strong. He was replaced quickly by, I believe, Moon Knight, of all people. And in Marvel Strike Force, he actually started off with a dismal, shitty rating, until people realized how easily the Defenders punch up. As a member of the Defenders team, and the connections between all of them, Hafe does go up several weight classes, but alone he isn't really that good. So his standout still was probably Marvel Avengers Alliance. Luke Cage was a joke in Marvel Avengers Alliance and considered an eternal pilot until he became worthy. Once he became worthy, he definitely sprung into the meta, along with somebody else that we'll get to. But prior to that, even with his little rework, he wasn't meta, but he could make Quicksilver a tiny bit more viable after he was reworked. Marvel Future Fight, Luke Cage really isn't anywhere. He had some usage in Alliance battles because of his ability to reflect physical damage, but he's largely been overlooked now and isn't particularly used. In Marvel Strike Force, he joins in the same rating that Iron Fist does, in that he's an okay tank, but he's much better as a cog in the wheel of the Defenders. So I would have to say Null was his high point, but if you want to deal strictly with Luke Cage, his highest power is probably Marvel Strike Force, only when he's part of the Defenders. Phoenix. Phoenix is a big one over here because we've got a lot to talk about with her. So White Crown Phoenix was probably her ultimate strongest position. We can find her here under blasters. Infiltrator White Crown Phoenix is probably where she was at her strongest, because she could do the whole death and rebirth thing. She had the Phoenix Force. Phoenix Fire was a huge thing. Mind Link was good because it turned somebody who isn't a tank into a tank if you wanted to. She enjoyed some meta for a little while because of her protection on death, until it was slightly nerfed. Marvel Future Fight and Marvel Strike Force, though, continue Phoenix's meta capabilities by making her high meta in both of those games. Marvel Future Fight, she is definitely one of the best blasters in the game as a female blaster. Completely one of the strongest, has time freezing like Doctor Strange, and a little bit more of a offensive kick, reses, and she is a high legendary character in Marvel Strike Force that you essentially have to earn your way into getting her, and she really enables X-Men teams or mutant teams there. Probably, it's tough to call where she was strongest, White Crown Infiltrator Phoenix versus how she is in Marvel Future Fight. I gotta say, though, it's probably going to go down in history that she's strongest in Marvel Future Fight. Here we have Spider-Woman again, an eternal pilot even after a little bit of a revamp, but it was her worthy incarnation as Kurth, where everybody came to absolutely hate her or love her if they used her. She exists really in no other game, so Marvel Avengers Alliance is the clear winner there. Spider-Man does exist in all three games, is very solid in all three games, but I think overall in terms of longevity and being the meta, Marvel Future Fight and Strike Force both have a longer period of time in which Spider-Man is meta. Now, for a little while, his Future Foundation suit was pretty strong in early MAA PvP. However, eventually it was largely overshadowed, and me personally, I preferred Scrapper Amazeball Spider-Man over everything. I was working on inventing a team around Infiltrator Black Suit Spider-Man, but never got to do a video on it, never really got to do it to fruition. Probably Marvel Future Fight's timeline battle, where he could keep somebody webbed the entire battle if your cooldown stats are at their max. That's probably where he's at his ultimate strongest. He's an extremely high dodger in Marvel Strike Force, sometimes dodging up to 5 attacks in a row, but I still think Marvel Future Fight is where he's at his strongest. Over here, War Machine is in all games, but I will definitely say that the most meta that War Machine has ever been has been his Tactician Pepsi Can, or Tactician Iron Patriot look. This one, with certain team-ups, survived literally until the end of the game. Maybe not at the highest levels. You maybe are not in Adamantium with, say, Pepsi Can and Havoc. However, they're extremely destructive, and they were also good for a lot of PvE stuff. Emma Frost. So Emma Frost is in 2 of the games, Marvel Avengers Alliance and Marvel Future Fight. She's reasonable in Future Fight. She does not exist in Strike Force yet. However, Marvel Avengers Alliance, when the Infiltrator pre-firing ISO came up, that says infiltrators can pre-counter, her infiltrator version, which was the Phoenix 5, was definitely where she was ridiculous meta. Her combined with Phoenix Force Colossus turned those two into a destructive force of nature that probably rivaled the Worthy for a little bit. The ISO was eventually nerfed, and everything about the whole pre-firing of the Psychic Tap went away. If you didn't exist in PvP at the time, basically what happened is if Emma saw you coming as Infiltrator Emma Frost, she would Psychic Tap you on the way in with the attack. Because you were committed to the attack, you would go ahead and trigger Psychic Tap without any chance of walking around it or blocking it or cleaning it, in any way, shape, or form. So if we take a look at her and we read Psychic Tap, essentially takes heavy damage after performing an offensive action, can be removed with recharge. So this was literally placed on you mid-punch. You were already committed to the action, you had no choice but to complete it. Therefore, Psychic Tap would always proc, and it always was huge damage because it was psychic. Quicksilver, definitely meta for a long time. Probably the first game changer in Marvel Avengers Alliance, in that Scrapper Quicksilver, especially Scrapper Blue Suit Quicksilver, as we often called him, Bisquick, literally said infiltrators are not welcome here. He exists not in Marvel Strike Force, but he does exist in Marvel Future Fight, and he was the leader of the speed meta for some time. He's still very good. He's still very good in timeline battle because he spends most of the battle untargetable, but I still would have to say he was strongest as Bisquick in Marvel Avengers Alliance. Deadpool is in all three. He's been fringe meta in all three for a while, although he is pretty good in speed in Marvel Future Fight. Beast. Let us talk about this dude right here. The Horseman of Pestilence, or Pesty. Beast himself, unlike, say, Angel, was never really worth a hell of a lot in their default Generalist suit. Once Pesty came out during the Apocalypse Spec Ops, he is the biggest game changer in all of Marvel Avengers Alliance until the death of the game. Sure, you had the Scroll of Rune of Marath. Sure, you had that thing in the Psychic Operator set. Nothing changed the game, literally, on its face, the way Pesty did. He's very much at his highest power in Marvel Avengers Alliance, specifically more towards the Infiltrator version of him because of the countering with Heart of Darkness, which generalizes. He was definitely at his strongest there. Tactician Pesty's good on offense. Infiltrator was better on defense. Every now and then the AI was a little jank with him, but he enabled a totally different meta in the game at the time, and that was the long game meta, where you stacked everything defensively. You went all bruisers, you went all tacticians, you went all generalists, and you just basically put the enemy team in quicksand and sat on the shore with a drink and an umbrella and watched them slowly die in the quicksand you set up. The only way to get around it was to kill Pesty, and then you could go ahead and get rid of his passive. Nothing affected the game the way Pesty did. There were some counters, but the fact that you could do Pesty with Anvi, Pesty with Red Hulk, Pesty with Enchantress, Pesty with anybody with excessive bleeds, or Captain Steve Rogers, and Pesty was my offensive team for a while. He is the single biggest game changer in all of Marvel Avengers Alliance in terms of a character, not necessarily gear, but I'd even put him up against gear. Marvel Future Fight, kind of nowhere. He has a buff that it can give somebody when they swap in, and he doesn't exist in Marvel Strike Force. Magneto. Magneto is a pretty strong villain blaster in Marvel Future Fight. He is also the root of an evil mutant team in Marvel Strike Force, or a Marauders team in Marvel Strike Force, and he definitely enjoyed quite a long run of being in PvP meta. You had Mag's Jugs, you had Mag's Quicksilver. His ISOs helped him out a little bit. I think right now he's probably at his ultimate strongest in Strike Force because he is the linchpin of one or two different teams, whereas in Marvel Avengers Alliance he was always kind of in the middle to the low end of the meta the whole time. Never really had a huge spike. Psylocke is in Marvel Future Fight and Marvel Strike Force, and she also enabled an entire meta in Marvel Avengers Alliance. Kwik-Lok was a huge meta for a long period of time, and her skills were also very good. I used her with X-Force Archangel on offense in two very distinctive parts of Marvel Avengers Alliance PvP, and they were glorious both times I used them. I have to say, even though she's relatively solid in Strike Force, Marvel Future Fight is where she was at her strongest. Over here, Omega Sentinel doesn't exist in any other game, but she was part of what was called the stall meta, where Omega Sentinel and Rescue were put in on people's defenses in the last weekend of a PvP season to basically have tons of shield, tons of heals, tons of cleanses, and just make the defensive team locked into battle by prolonging it, thereby meaning they couldn't take a lot of defensive battles. She was meta there, she exists in no other game, so we can't really talk about her. Rescue was the other part, the AB part of the conversation when it came to the stall meta. She is in Strike Force, she's in Future Fight, but she just doesn't really write home in either one of those particular games. She is good for a power armor team in Marvel Strike Force, and she essentially reprises her role as a healer and a shielder, but I will say, much like Omega Sentinel, her high point was definitely Marvel Avengers Alliance in the defensive meta for kind of the middle seasons of PvP, until people eventually figured out how to get around her. But her ISOs continue to make her relatively viable. She's just a huge pain in PvE to level. It was boring. Juggernaut definitely enjoyed a large time as being part of PvP. Juggernaut Magneto, Juggernaut Quicksilver, any of the physical metas were very good for Juggernaut until like Hugin's Eye showed up and everything. Capable of doing buckets of damage, and he is in Future Fight. He's literally nowhere in Future Fight. And he is in Marvel Strike Force as part of the Evil Mutant team with Sabretooth and Mystique and Magneto. I'm probably going to have to give the nod to Marvel Avengers Alliance as for where he was at his strongest. Over here, Black Bolt wasn't really ever meta, but he's now showing up in Marvel Strike Force as a high legendary similar to Phoenix. Broken for a long time. There's not much to talk about on this particular screen. Over here, not a super lot to talk about. I will say Moon Knight enjoyed a little bit of popularity in Marvel Future Fight for a while as a hero combat guy. Sabretooth is probably... he is relatively strong in Strike Force. He's okay in Future Fight. It was always pretty strong in Marvel Avengers Alliance. I used him for PvP for a while. He was good with Ares, but his meta period was short-lived. Loki was never particularly meta, even though he's decent in other games. Doom only exists in Marvel Avengers Alliance and in Future Fight. He talks to you in Strike Force, but he's not playable. He's okay in Future Fight, not really super meta, but when Doom first dropped, he was definitely meta for a while in Marvel Avengers Alliance. Eventually, his power curve completely fell off a cliff, so that in the end, half a year of the game, he had the same amount of hit points as an agent, so why would you cripple your PvP team to bring only one other character who literally was just about as strong as the agent? The Warriors 3 collectively enjoyed a reasonable meta for a period of time. Their strongest was Marvel Avengers Alliance. They are nowhere in any of the other games, and they don't exist in Strike Force. Falcon was obnoxious meta in Marvel Avengers Alliance. A lot of people ran him on stall defensive teams because of his passives and the fact that he was hard to kill. He never did a whole lot of damage to you, but he was a pest. And he definitely was a pest meta kind of guy, similar to Rescue. It's this survival training that made him viable on defense for a while. He is relatively strong in Marvel Strike Force if on a power armor team, because he literally says the enemy team's buffs will work against them and empower your team. I would probably have to say he's nowhere in Future Fight, I'd have to say Strike Force right now is where he's at his strongest, only on a power armor team. As an individual, he was stronger in Avengers Alliance. Sandman was very good defensively for defensive teams, especially rising up teams in Marvel Avengers Alliance. He was originally considered a very, very good tank in Marvel Future Fight for a long period of time. Pretty tough to kill. He doesn't exist in Strike Force. I'd have to say, likely he was at his strongest in Marvel Avengers Alliance if you built a team around Rising Up. Anti-Venom was definitely at his strongest in Marvel Avengers Alliance. You paired him with Pesty for a while. Big numbers. Purge had to take a little bit of a hit because it was too strong, and Crusade is a vicious, vicious utility. Excuse me, a vicious hitting ability over there. He doesn't exist in Strike Force. He does exist in Future Fight, and on a Spider team, he's relatively solid, but he definitely was at his best in Avengers Alliance. Here we see some of the Guardians. They enjoyed a high period of meta when the first movie was coming out, and we were getting all of the Guardians of the Galaxy characters. Groot, Gamora, Star-Lord, Drax, all of them were showing up in PvP. I would have to say at a Strike Force and Future Fight, where they all exist now, Avengers Alliance is probably where they are at their best. However, a Guardians team in Strike Force really punches up very, very well. It's sort of hard to compare because you can get more of them in 5 compared to 2. But a well-rounded Guardians team with either Minerva or Mantis and dropping Gamora very much punches above its weight class. So it's a tough call. Maybe Strike Force as a unified Guardians one is better. However, Star-Lord individually was at his strongest in Marvel Avengers Alliance because this version of Star-Lord enabled the high-speed attack meta, where it was like him and Spitfire, him and Quicksilver. Anytime you wanted to kill something within the first round, you probably had a Star-Lord there. So, moving on, we have Blade in Avengers Alliance and Future Fight. Probably at his strongest that one little period of time where his ISOs enabled him to be a ruthless killer in Avengers Alliance. He's nowhere in Future Fight. Molly Hayes, definitely meta defensively, meta for group bosses, meta offensively for PvP. She doesn't exist in any other game, sadly, so clearly she wins in Avengers Alliance. Over here, slight honorable mention to the fact that Destroyer is a very good anti-energy character in Marvel Future Fight. Doesn't exist in Strike Force. Due to that, he was probably more meta in Future Fight than he was in Avengers Alliance because like Luke Cage did for physical, he does for energy reflection. So he was used in a lot of Alliance versus Alliance battles. Victor was a very, very, very large pain in the ass defensively as an infiltrator because of his ability to res and not die. Meta in Avengers Alliance doesn't exist anywhere else. Over here, Spider-Man Noir only exists in Avengers Alliance. He, similar to Star-Lord, was part of the multi-attack, kick-your-ass offensive teams. He was meta for a long time, ever from when he came out to the end of the game. It's just we don't have a comparison in other games over there. Here, Amazing Spider-Girl was meta for a good period of time with Heroic Age Iron Fist, especially the Spider-Girl uniforms as compared to the Spider-Woman uniforms. However, Playdom essentially nerfed her twice, and she dropped out of the meta pretty quickly, and again, doesn't have a direct comparison. Spitfire, I mean, what can I say about her? She took what Quicksilver did and did it better in nearly every category. She hit harder, she bled, she could do fatal blows. You could give her an ISO to hit phase people, which would be Cloak and Dagger, that we'll talk about in a little bit. Sadly, she doesn't exist in any other game. I would like to see what another game could do with her. I would say she would show up in Future Fight before anything. I wouldn't hold my breath, though. She clearly was amazing in Avengers Alliance, and then nothing really since then. Elsa was a little bit meta for a while in Marvel Avengers Alliance PvP until they started doing a lot of anti-magic related things. The Deb, the Dark Energy Blade, was her biggest downfall. It's what shut her down. She is not particularly meta in Strike Force, although she is good on a Mystic team. She was meta for speed in Future Fight for a little while before Kid Kaiju replaced her. I'd have to say her strongest meta was probably when she was speed in Future Fight. Over here, Electro was a vicious blaster in PvP. Very good in PvE. He does exist in Future Fight, and it would be quite cool if he showed up in Strike Force as part of the Sinister Six. We'll see what happens. Future Fight, he's currently running the villain speed meta, but not for very much longer. The update coming should fix that. I would say he was meta in Avengers Alliance and has the distinct infamy of being part of the Crash meta for a little while, where you put him on defense with Beta Ray Bill and a certain piece of gear on the agent, and your game would crash, thereby making the defensive team win. Cloak and Dagger. We all know these two were meta. Unfortunately, they don't exist in any other game, and their series has been cancelled, even though it was good. Cloak and Dagger were two separate cards in Marvel Battle Lines, and Cloak was okay, but Dagger was a very good card that made it into each one of my decks. Shocker is in Strike Force and Future Fight. Not particularly meta anywhere. He is part of the Sinister Six team, where the team does well and really likes to counter buffs and shield teams, but he as an individual isn't meta anywhere. And then finally we come to some of the heavy hitters over here. Faiza Hussein does not exist in any other game, therefore we can't compare her. Ronan does, but he is not particularly strong in any of the games. He's very solid on a Kree team after his rework in Strike Force, and he enables universal characters to do better in Future Fight. I'd have to say he's probably at his most meta in Strike Force, but only on a Kree team. Warlock is basically a god. He is in Future Fight, but he is not used, and we had no PvP where we could use Adam Warlock, and we had no PvP where we could use White Tiger. So there you go, guys. That about wraps it up. If we go back and look at the wiki as a little final cheat sheet over here, you can see here the infiltrators, but we'll go back up here to the tacticians. So we'll run them down. We'll just say multiple games, or whether they were MAA only. Multiple games. Actually, that'll take too long. Forget it. I'm not going to do that. But you can see here, you can look at the tacticians and know who was a star for a little while. Like, Kang wasn't, but Gamora was for a bit. Phantom X was too weak for a long time until a slight rework. Red Hulk was really good with pesty teams, and kind of mild when he wasn't on a pesty team. Blasters, Havoc was part of the counter-pesty meta. Kingfisher liked to talk about Iron Patriot and Havoc as being very anti-pesty for a while. Rocket, oh my god, I'm sorry, I totally forgot about Rocket. Rocket was very meta in Marvel Avengers Alliance, and he's very solid in Strike Force and a very distinct part of the Guardians teams. In Future Fight, not really anywhere. If you want to compare his strong periods in MAA and Strike Force, I would say he's stronger in MAA because he could exist as his own entity and do very, very well and enable certain teams to work. Whereas in Strike Force, he's just another cog in the wheel of a Guardians team. Here, Anti-Venom definitely was ridiculous in PvP for a while. Phoenix 5 Colossus enjoyed a rebirth with the Emma meta, and then promptly kind of went away, but people refound Colossus near the end of the game. He's okay in Future Fight, and he's okay on an X-Men team at Strike Force, but he was probably at his best in Avengers Alliance when he was part of popular metas, or you could slap a scutcheon on him and make him drain and everything. Thor kind of winds up being a little bit average in all of the games. Nothing super much to write home about. Same thing for Deadpool and the Scrappers. He's generally decent, but not the best in something. Infiltrators, clearly Cloak and Dagger ruled PvP until the end of the game. However, has no counterparts in any other games. And for the people who thought Cloak and Dagger was too overpowered, you just Spitfire. Just run a Scrapper. Run your own Cloak and Dagger, and you had an advantage over a defensive Cloak and Dagger. Psylocke, strongest in Marvel Avengers Alliance. The Generalist, Beast in his pesty form, was strongest in Marvel Avengers Alliance. Punisher is average in several games, not that strong. Taskmaster is coming to Future Fight, so we'll see how that works for him. Blue Marvel, on the low end of viable, the low medium end of viable. Moon Knight was a little better in Future Fight for a little while. White Tiger was too overpowered to ever make it into PvP. And Mockingbird really isn't anything to write home about in Future Fight or in Avengers Alliance, except for her worthy suit. It's pretty good. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if there was any meta characters that I missed out on and didn't touch on, or if you agree or disagree with any of my sentiments comparing these characters to their counterparts in Future Fight and Strike Force. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good one.